Hi, it's Ethan Skolnick from 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Before we get to today's episode, I want to tell you about a couple of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. The first is East Coast Public Adjusters, which wants to let you know there's only 10 months left to open your IRMA claim. So call now before it's too late. That's 855-GET-ECPA. 855-GET-ECPA. You've got a leaky roof, experiencing plumbing issues. Those problems are most likely covered by your insurance policy. So don't settle for less. For a free no-obligation inspection, call East Coast Public Adjusters. They've been in business for 31 years. That's all the way since 1988 when the Miami Heat were born. Here's the number again, 855-GET-ECPA, or visit their website, ecpaclaims.com. Their knowledgeable staff standing by to take all of your questions. And another of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and of course that is AutoNation, the largest auto retailer from coast to coast. Their friendly and knowledgeable staff here in South Florida will help you save big on a huge selection of new cars, trucks, and SUVs, Toyota, Honda, Chevrolet, Mercedes-Benz, and much, much more. If you're looking to buy pre-owned, shop AutoNation's huge selection of one-price pre-owned vehicles, all clearly marked with one price, their lowest price guaranteed. To get rid of that old car and turn it into cash today, you'll get a top dollar offer and a check the very same day from AutoNation. They'll buy your car with no purchase necessary. Here's what you need to do. We've had several people do this and have a great experience. DM me at 5 Reasons Sports. That's at 5 Reasons Sports on Twitter. I will give your information to a senior manager at AutoNation, and they will help you through the entire buying process. And now, today's episode.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back here on the 5 on the Floor podcast and the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Today I have the privilege to talk to two members of the Miami Heat's front office, Andy Elisburg and Adam Simon, down here at American Airlines Arena. And what we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, was kind of go through how the Heat has been able to use the G League to its advantage and bring in the kind of players that'll fit here in the program. Thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here today.
Appreciate it. I want to go through a little history of it first for people who don't understand kind of, I guess, how the G League became the G League and how we went from kind of, multi, team affiliates with several teams that were kind of sending players to one. And just looking at it, it looks like, sometime between, I guess, 2009, 2015, there was this kind of to one team. How did that change things?
Well, when the NBA, basically, took over the ownership essentially of the G League, or what was sort of initially there was a CBA, which is way back when, where teams had an affiliate relationship, and then the NBA sort of formed the G League. Some teams that were, when the CBA folded, were absorbed in. The Skyforce were one of the teams. Other teams were new teams that came in. And they basically just assigned teams, NBA teams to these G League teams. And it was generally somewhere between 3 to 4 NBA teams per G League team, because at the time that was a much smaller group of them. And, we were, I think, in Iowa at one point in time. I think we were with a team that was up in Fort Myers at one point in time. And then as the shuffling went through, some teams were beginning to take on one-to-one relationships with him. And we wound up being partnered up with the Skyforce in Sioux Falls. And as we started to sort of begin to take use of it, and working a little bit with the Skyforce people, we found we had a really symbiotic relationship with the ownership of the Skyforce. Mm-hmm. It has been, I think that now the longest standing, G League team, I think in minor league basketball. And it was a lot of the same kind of, values we had. It's a family-owned ownership. I think it's a really great support. And they were in the process of building a new facility out there to be able to, to play in. That was just a really gorgeous facility, and the kind of facility you want to play in, right around the time as teams were beginning to, really start to commit to single ownership or single proprietorship. And so because so many things made sense and we really liked the relationship, we decided to move forward in a one-to-one relationship with the Skyforce and become initially a hybrid team. And then several years into it, we wound up purchasing an interest in it and are now partners with them. And it's been fantastic. I mean, it really has been great support there. I think the fan support out there is really special. I think they care about it. When our players are there, I think they can tell that the games matter, that the games what you're playing in matters, what you're doing matters. You have a first-class facility out there, a first-class field house, great support from the staff that is there, and it creates a great environment for our guys when we get out there, even though, it's a couple plane rides to get there.
I was going to ask about that. Before I do, though, I want to get, because I think people know your history, Andy, and kind of when you broke in here. But for people who are not as familiar with everything Adam's done here the past few years, what was your first year with the Heat again?
95, 96.
Okay.
I walked into Miami Arena. Andy was there to greet me, and he said, go down the hall, make a left. There's a guy named Eric Spolstra that will tell you what to do. And that was my first day. It was a preseason game, our first preseason game of that season. And so that was my first entry into the Miami Heat, and I interned with Eric on game nights that first night. Eric recommended me back up to the front office. I did another internship, full year, 2 years of interning with the Heat, and in the summer I was hired full-time.
So let me get to the thing that Andy brought up there at the end, which is he said it's 2 plane rides to get there. I think when people think of minor league teams, a lot of times they'll think, because you mentioned Estero, the team was in Estero for a little while. I remember making that trip with Darrell Wright once.
Andy, he forgot to mention we were in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we were in Albuquerque. We were in a couple other places as well.
Spots before you got out there. But this is one, I posed this question on Twitter to people when I said I was doing this, what they were interested in. One of the things I think that intrigues people is how because you guys talk about culture here, but how you infuse a culture in a place that is literally completely opposite part of the country. I mean, what are the challenges that have come in, even with all the great facilities and everything else, to just having a place that is just so far?
I think what we've really tried to do is incorporate our coaches. 3 of our coaches started here in our program in Miami, so they were here for many years. Pat Delaney and Dan Craig, who's with us, and now Eric Glass. So they've breathed it. They've had it every single day of their careers of being under our program here, and so for them it's really easy. A couple other coaches that didn't come through our program, they had to get caught up, and we try to have them involved as much as possible. Draft workouts, summer league, off-season workouts. As much as we can do, and credit to Coach Spo. It's a priority to him to develop his coaches and have them understand exactly what we're doing here and replicate that. The players are different, obviously. They're different types of players of their abilities and their games, but as much as we can have those guys doing as much as what we're doing up here, that is not, on the court they're doing the same, but also video room sessions, nutrition, any sort of preparation. Our coaches are doing almost exactly what we're doing up here.
And to a certain degree, I think one of the things that, when we took over the hybrid, and we had the philosophical, commitment to do this because we could see where the opportunities were to be able to develop young players and be able to work with guys, while they're developing up and utilizing what really this was the commitment from, our ownership and management and Coach Riley and the Harrisons, and then down to us, that this was going to be a key part of what we did, and this would be part of our group. It wasn't just, okay, we're going to have a separate G League, team that's going to be separate management, separate thing. This became under my priority and under, obviously Adam as general manager and Chet Cameras and Eric Spolstra in terms of people that were part of his staff and, keeping his, the group as part of the summer league and part of training camp. So that was part of, the coaching staff is a offshoot of his staff, and it's part of our management. And so this was going to be our priority. And so that sort of philosophy of how we were kind of going to do it our way there, how we approached it, what we saw that was going to be a priority of what we were doing, I think, that sort of sets a tone. And I think that there's some advantages of the fact that, the distance away has some challenges and some advantages. Obviously it's a challenge where you have to, take 2 flights, although, getting there is not as difficult as it would have thought. I can get from Miami to Sioux Falls through Atlanta, Minnesota, Dallas, Chicago, Denver, pretty much, and Phoenix. Pretty much from those cities, I can get around the world. Mm-hmm. So often, you're catching it, from different places. We're on the road, and you might wind up in a road trip somewhere. We're in Chicago, and then Skyforce is there next day. You're able to sort of bridge the gap, whether it's for players or coaches having to come and go. So there's some challenges where you have to get there. But one of the things that I think that is really good there is for the management's there, for the coaches, and for the and our GMs. They're in charge. Mm-hmm. They're there. And it's been a great development for them. It's a great experience for them to be able to get, really hands-on management of being in charge. As you know, when you're, there's no substitute for being in charge of something. And having to deal with the mistakes, the things that go well, things that don't go well, and be accountable for those kinds of things. And look, we're a phone call away if there's ever a problem. And, I'll each of us will go there a handful of times a year so that there isn't really anyone has to go, all the time. So I'm usually there probably about half a dozen times, probably, of us the same. So that, and we try to kind of make it so that there's no more than any 2-week period that we have touched them in person, so that they know that they're constantly, we're there with them, so that, we're able to have our appearances. But when they're there and they're in charge, and coaches are responsible for making decisions and having to deal with those kinds of issues you have to deal with. And that's, I think, one of the things I think it helps that. And I think, I think from a player's perspective, when we used to bring players into training camp, and you'd sign, you're able to have 20 in the off season. You cut down to a 15-man roster. Now it's a 17 with 2-way players. And those 5 players, you'd have to sort of, maybe you have a roster spot open, and you have to choose between 3 or 4 players to one roster spot, and hope you chose right, and then the rest of the players would scatter away. Mm-hmm. Now that the fact that they're able to sort of, if they don't make your NBA team, they're going to your G League team, that there's a sense that it's not just, okay, we have 1 month to make an impression, that you have an opportunity really for a player who signs with us, you're developing for the whole year with the Miami Heat. It's either the Miami Heat or either Miami Heat in Miami or the Miami Heat organization in Sioux Falls. Mm-hmm. And there's a sense you have a chance to really to have more of a relationship with them, see how they're developing. And maybe you find out someone maybe in October wasn't ready, but in December or January and February becomes more ready. And you're able to spend that time in developing them, and then with a chance for them to move on up. And so it creates, the fact you're having those relationships, it creates a tremendous advantage.
I know both of you guys are fans of teams in other sports. You mentioned the 2-way contract, something that just came in a couple of years ago, which I know is something that the organization wanted and a lot of other organizations wanted. Obviously, baseball has been the sport that has used the minor league system more so than any others. Are there lessons that you took from kind of how other teams and other sports or use this in terms of how to use this as a tactical advantage?
One of the things, when I first got involved, when we were first involved, that kind of looked at what some other teams had done, and one of the things I think you like to think, some teams that had guys there for a significant period of time, wasn't just day up, day down. The fact you were there for a month, maybe here for players that are going back and forth, that there was more longer time with the team there than maybe just day here, day there. That you were able to really allow them to be incorporate part of the team. I think that was something you saw with Detroit and Amir Johnson back in the day. I remember when we were looking at it, seeing how kind of his development of how it happened. I talked to San Antonio a lot, and they talked about really the importance of how you have to maintain keeping close to the team, close to the team. But I think you also tried to look at it like baseball. I think where this isn't, I think there's a tendency for people sometimes to think this is punishment. That being involved, it's development. It isn't punishment. It's about, how you can take, for some players who I think who are for whatever reason they don't get cut. They should have been, shouldn't have been cut. Whatever, they didn't wind up on a team, and they go to the development league and they get another opportunity, and they have a chance to, to make it come into the NBA. But in other players, sometimes they're just not ready. And it's an opportunity really to take advantage of development, which is, I think, where you see in baseball, where you really, you take guys who are going to be ultimately in the major leagues and say, we're making them better, improving their skills. So when they make it in the NBA, ultimately making a Major League Baseball, they're able to stay in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I think the advantage, what Andy was talking about before, is for us, we don't look at it like we're shuttling players for the distance. We're not shuttling guys game to game. We have to on on occasion when we have injuries with the Heat. But we look at it when we assign a player to Sioux Falls, that they're there for a period of time where they're focused on being with the team and spending time there working on their game, getting those minutes, getting those reps. And they're not just thinking about, hey, when am I getting back to Miami? Mm-hmm. They're there to work and put in the time. And I think for us, having that team, having a team in Sioux Falls gives us that's the advantage for us. It's not send a player there and he's ready. He's already thinking about being back with the parent club. Mm-hmm. Let's keep the focus on development and putting in the time and spending the time with our G League coaches.
And you're playing those games, that those games matter. When you're going there's a game and there's expectation that, that game matters. It's not just, okay, I'll get 20 minutes of the game time tonight. We want to win. Mm-hmm. We like winning. We don't like losing. Whether it's the G League level or the NBA level, we don't like to lose. And we don't take it well. So we want guys when they go there to approach the games there like they matter. It's not just, okay, I got some reps in, get some points up, and whatever happens in the game doesn't matter.
You've had all kinds of guys, different types of players come through there and have success. But you mentioned earlier kind of this is a program thing where obviously it's an organization, you're trying to develop players that are going to fit here, right? How do you sort of draw that balance between kind of obviously this team comes first because this is the primary club, but the balance between the kind of player you're trying to develop for here and maybe how someone will fit in that kind of Sioux Falls culture, so to speak? Yeah,
and we, I think we're always, whenever I have a question, whenever there's something that's, we think that it's important for the Skyforce, having a player for the Skyforce, and I run it up, to Andy, we always try to keep the main thing of what's the priority for the Heat. And that's what comes first. And, if a player is important for or needed here and what they're going to do for our team, that's obviously the most important thing. Once that is taken care of, once we have everything that's our priority for the Heat, then it's a matter of trying to get those players into our program in Sioux Falls and having them there and doing whatever they need to do to be ready to when their number's called to be back here. Now, the great thing is we've had a bunch of players that have come through our program. We've brought them up here, and they've had a lot of success here. I think one thing that gets overlooked too are there's been players that we've liked coming out of the summer, whether it was we got them after the draft or through summer league and they didn't make our team, and we had them in Sioux Falls and they didn't live up to what we thought they were. So as much as we've benefited from having players succeed, I think the Skyforce has been good for us also to save us on whatever financial commitment or time that we would have potentially had if we had signed them right away for the Heat. Now we've been able to weed out some of those players that didn't fit up to that culture, that the culture that we want to have or the type of player we want to have. So it's great to have the success, but it also helps us avoid some misses that players that didn't make it.
We had an example with Tyler Johnson. He came in and had came into summer league and made an impression in summer league, and then when we came time, we had an open spot on the roster, and he didn't have as strong a training camp or as strong as preseason. Other guys had, we needed for the roster, so we made a different decision. He went to Sioux Falls and he played well. I mean, he really went there and made an impact, on and off the court. And, how he approached it, he approached it the way to say, I know I'm better. I know I belong in the NBA. And sometimes players approach that by pouting and saying, well, it's unfair. He didn't pout. He went down there and said, I'm going to show you I'm better every day. And he was great in the community. He was great with the team. And he really played well. And after, a month or two of the season, the player we had kind of wasn't, had plateaued and hadn't quite playing as well. And Tyler's playing really well. And Adam said to me, hey, someone may grab him soon. We may really want to think about it. And so he said, okay, let's make a move a little bit beforehand, because we were sort of be able to kind of keep an eye ahead of the game. And
But isn't that one of the difficult things to decide, like that moment, like where you're afraid you're going to, I mean, it happened to Golden State with Kendrick, right? To a certain degree, right? Like that's, I mean,
yeah, look, you have a relatively short period of time to make a decision on guys, and then you don't know, and you're trying to decide kind of where you think they are, where you think they're going to develop, and what your team need is at any particular moment in time, because you only have 15 roster spots at the NBA. So this is obviously before the two-ways. The two-ways give you a little bit more flexibility to be able to develop a player who may not be quite ready, and being able to sort of manage that in between period of time. But at the time, you had to decide, okay, what do I need not only for my trying to guesstimate on the development of the player and what the kind of moves that he's going to make, but also what your team needs are. And you had to try to sort of balance those well as consolidated as you can of what it can be. And then sometimes you made the right choice and you grabbed the right guy, and sometimes you made the wrong choice, or the guy who didn't develop the way you thought he was going to, or the player that you'd let go was able to develop a little bit more, and you're able to sort of keep that player in the family, as it were, be able to sort of see their development a little bit more, have your coaches with them on a daily basis and see what's going on, and because of that, because you're focused on that, you pay attention to other rosters. Adam was one of the first ones to recognize after, Hassan Whiteside got waived, from Memphis, and looked and said, after first or second game, he said, hey, that guy's putting up some really impressive numbers. We need to really look at it. And we were one of the first people to make the call to his agent to saying, hey, we want to try to get him for the NBA roster. And that was, because you had the development league, you're paying attention. So it's not just you're looking at your own rosters, you're looking at other people's rosters too, and trying to see where the opportunities are to be able to, get someone to be able to transition to the NBA and find talent, because we're trying to find the best talent we can for the Miami Heat, and that's what our goal is. That's what our goal has always been. And I think, we're also, doing it in a way to make, a productive team for the Skyforce.
Before we close here, you guys have had so many success stories lately that it's almost hard to keep track. But, and I know that kind of when you have one, that there's an expectation that the next guy who comes up is going to do the same thing, which I know is not always possible. But just want to go through a couple guys with you. I think people are sort of stunned by not the fact that Duncan Robinson can shoot, because we all knew that, but that he's done the other things well enough to be able to be a significant contributor this year. Adam, can you go a little through sort of Duncan's sort of road to getting to this place?
Yeah, so we prepare for the draft, obviously all year long, and evaluate players. And Duncan's a fifth-year senior who's a sixth man at Michigan, and we were preparing and we're going through our workouts, not only here in Miami, but traveling around the country watching players. And Chet Cameron and I, we talk obviously all year long about players. And Chet calls me and he's like, Adam, I'm watching this workout in California, and Duncan is just, he's unbelievable in this workout. His shooting is elite. And we say, sure, Chet, we like Duncan, but you talk about a fifth-year player not even averaging 10 points a game coming off the bench, and now you think he's an NBA prospect. And Chet's like, I don't know what his upside could be, but I know he's an elite shooter. And I said, all right, well, let's just try to get him into our program. I don't know if he'll be drafted or not, but let's just try to get him any which way we can. And so we end up getting him for Summer League and put him through our program. And he shows us, hey, not only can he perform at that level, but there is other parts of his game that not only he can do, but with the right development and right in our program, he might be able to show that he can make it at the next level. Getting him after Summer League, we were able to tie him into the two-way contract and put him in Sioux Falls. And he's a perfect example of what we've just spent time talking about. Having him up there last year, again, the shooting, like you said, we know he could shoot. Could he do it at that level against professional players? But he, to credit to him, he's come in every day. He's asked what he could be better at, and the ability to not only make plays without the ball, getting open, his moving, his cutting, his ability to make plays for others, and his dedication and focus into the defensive end is something that you can just say, hey, our coaches have done a great job, but it takes a special player. And, really I give him a lot of credit for putting in that time and saying, hey, I can shoot. Yeah, I know I can do this at any level, but to put in the time to do the other things that have made him an asset and just get the trust of Coach Spo to play him, it's amazing. He's real special.
And I think that it's a credit to all the parts of both the Miami Heat and Skyforce staff that kind of worked with him as well. The work that Duncan put in is obviously unparalleled. That was his work. But it was the nutrition group and it was the coaching group that worked with him, was available, and he's an example of what. There are times, as I said, we talked earlier about players who, for whatever reason, missed. They got cut, shouldn't have been cut, and they wound up going. He's an example of a player who wasn't ready and said, okay, how do I get ready? How do I change my body? How do I change my understanding of the game and the other nuances part of the game? How do I become ready? And starting with a two-way contract and then spending a lot of time in the Skyforce and then coming up on the NBA roster. And not playing that much, playing a little bit role, moments here or there, and starting to transition the time you've learned in the Skyforce to be able to help a little bit the NBA roster, then going through another summer of continuing to work with your body and change your body and get ready for an opportunity. And then, and the final piece of it is obviously cannot be unsaid, is the commitment for both Coach Riley and Coach Spoelstra for players like this. The commitment of roster spots, the commitment of believing in them. And if you look back at Pat's history of Kurt Rambis, who was a starter for maybe one of the greatest teams to ever play the game of basketball as an undrafted guy and was a starter for that team. And in New York, whether, looking at John Starks and Anthony Mason are guys that came through similar paths. And Udonis Haslam with us, Joel Anthony with us, Bruce Bowen with us. There's a number of players who have, may not have been ready at various points in time that got opportunities. Now the G League gives us more afford opportunities with it. And Duncan's the latest example of a guy who's kind of worked his way in and not only got himself onto a roster, but has now got himself a role and has now got himself to a starting role. So, it's great to see.
He's moved on quite a bit. Final thing, I remember talking to Erica about 3 years ago about wanting these two-way contracts, and they ended up happening. Is there something else now that you think that the NBA should be looking at to make the system even better? Would you have a recommendation, Adam?
I'll leave that with our general manager, Andy.
To me, I think the biggest challenge with it that I've sort of suggested to them is that the last time you can sign a two-way contract is in mid-January. I probably would prefer it to be after the trade deadline. There's some discussion about whether or not would you want more players. Like right now, each team has two players for a two-way contract. Is it better to go to the third player? I've kind of been in favor of keeping it at two because I think you still want to maintain the G League as a place for teams to be able to have talent that you need. If we need a point guard somewhere, if we need a two guard, or we need a three, you want to make sure that there's still available talent for guys to come in that's not necessarily just being held by one team. Because right now, to some degree, the best 60 players in the G League, more or less, are not available. There's obviously some outliers in that, but a majority of it, is not available. If it was 90, I think it'd be a little bit of a concern. So I think there's a balance between maintaining the G League as being an open opportunity for players and us being able to find, but also I think what the two-way contract gives is that if you're really committing to somebody the resources, you're not worried about losing them in the middle of the night. You have a chance really to develop them over a period of time and kind of develop them at a pace without having to kind of be rushed because someone else suddenly has an open roster spot and now that opens up the door. But I think to be able to sort of reshuffle it a little bit, because as you have somebody who maybe is at a point in time that they are able to transition from a two-way contract to an NBA contract and then being able to sort of be able to maintain that relationship with a two-way contract. That's probably, for me, the next level of it. I think they did a great job in changing after the first year to allow the counting days a little bit more, so it didn't include travel days. So, you had some horror stories at one point in time when teams were short on dates where you had to send players on commercial aircraft because you couldn't fly them on the charter craft to get to the city that you're in. That wasn't really in anyone's best interest, but I think that after a year of experimenting, we figured, okay, that didn't make sense, and so the league and
that's helped you this year, right, with Chris? Luis.
Correct.
Silva.
Correct.
Yeah.
The first year, I think, when you didn't quite know exactly what we were doing with it, I think it became clear around the league that was becoming a little bit of a challenge, and the league and the Players Association got together and said, okay, that doesn't make sense, because you wanted players to obviously earn, it's a significant financial difference if you're an NBA day versus a G League day,
right.
Of what it is financially, but you also want to make sure that you're maximizing those days so that they're being used at productive basketball days. And so if it's an off day on the road and there's no practice and that's being used as a day, and that limits your days, so that, because at the end of the day, it's really about the development and the opportunity, and you're still seeing players to this day are able to transition that opportunity. And Chris Silva is now the latest who's beginning to be able to make an impact with that.
Do you want to defer to Andy's answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the G League has done a great job. I mean, they're the experimental league of the NBA, and we've been on the rules committees for several years and experimenting and throwing ideas out there, and some they've absorbed. And I think for them, until we get to a 30 for 30 in the G League, there's 28 teams now. I think the rules will continue to evolve and change. We talk about rights players, the G League. Having be able to hold the players' rights for 2 years. I think that's something that we can look at to give players more freedom to move instead of tying them up. And like Andy, it's a double edge here with the two ways, because you're protecting two players, which is great, because if you find players that you like, you want to protect them. But at the same time, you also, like we just mentioned, want to be able to add players during the season from the league. But as I always tell Andy, there's always players out there, and players are getting better, and that's what our job is to do, is to find those players that are out there, like Kane Dunn, Hendrick was last year. There's always players that are putting in that time to get better, to help themselves, and those are the kind of guys we're looking for. We've done this many years now together, and I feel like we've identified the type of player. We call it Heat DNA. What are the kind of guys that we're looking for that could potentially make it? We don't always get them, but you got to sift through a lot of rocks to find the gold, and I think that's what we like to do here.
Well, I want to thank you guys, Andy Elisburg, Adam Simon. I think people were really looking forward to this, to kind of go behind the scenes a little bit. So thanks for doing it.
You're very welcome. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Andy Elisburg and Adam Simon for coming on today. Also want to thank another of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that's the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm. You can find them at onecalllegal.com. That's onecalllegal.com. They've got someone there 24 hours a day to handle every possible kind of case that you have anywhere in the state. That includes immigration, also traffic tickets, personal injury, and so much more. They've got an office right in North Miami, right off of I-95, so you can come in and get your problem taken care of. I can tell you that they do a great job with traffic tickets, because I've used them for that, and I've gotten the result that I wanted. So check out the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm. That's onecalllegal.com. Also, check out 5reasonsports.com, the @5reasonsports Twitter account, and everything else in the 5 Reasons Sports Network.